Okay. Well, aloha, everybody. Welcome to our presentation, Designing Your Life with Decision Making. And today we're diving into decision making, not just the everyday choices we make on autopilot, but the ones that shape our careers, relationships, and futures. We often think of decisions as right or wrong, good or bad, but what if the key to better decision making is moving beyond this binary thinking? So, in this workshop, we'll explore a structured approach to making choices with confidence. So, please have a pen and paper ready for our activity today. Okay, so now let us introduce ourselves. We have who is here today. On the screen, you'll see Angela Color Ready McGo. Am I saying it right, Angela? I've never pronounced your last name.
It's coloretti like spaghetti, McGough like cough.
Yeah, sorry. I have never pronounced your name before. I just call her Angela. But here's Angela. She's our employment prep center counselor and coordinator at Kapiʻolani Community College. And in the middle, Tomoko Skinner here, the student career specialist at Hawaiʻi Community College, and Kimberly Martinson, student career specialist at UH Maui College. Velina Maikako, welcome to our session. Okay, so designing your life. What is designing your life? So this is a New York Times best-selling book written by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, who are both design program educators and mechanical engineers at Stanford University. So they developed the concept of design thinking, which can be applied to social, personal, and professional situations, and also created and taught a designing your life course at University. And designers create worlds and solve problems using design thinking. And if you look around your home or classroom or office, look at your smartphone, tablet, you may be holding or the chair you're sitting in. So everything in our lives was designed by someone. So every design starts with a problem that designer or team seeks to solve. Okay, so this is today's learning objectives. So first, apply a four-step decision-making process and generate and narrow options effectively, and use the decision matrix for prioritization, leverage intuition and emotions and decisions. So that means you're listening to your na'a or your gut, and access and reflect on decision quality. Okay, so to get us started, we're going to do a little bit of warm up. Type in the chat box as quickly as possible which of the two options you prefer. Okay, I'm going to start with this question. Coffee or tea? Type in the chat box. Coffee or tea? Ooh, okay. Coffee, tea. Okay, we have a mix of the answers. Nice. Okay, moving on. City life or country life? City, a country. Oh, a bunch of countries. Thank you for that. Oh, we have some city. Okay, nice. Okay, cat or dog? Dog, cat. Okay, we have about, oh, cat always. Okay, we have about half and half. Texting or calling? Okay, texting, calling depends. Nice, texting. Okay, either. Okay, thank you. Winter or summer? Summer, winter. Okay, we have both. Okay. Oh, nice. Winter. Mm. And then beach vacation or mountain vacation? Beach. Okay, we have more beach. Okay, mountain vacay. Nice. Beach. Nice. Okay. And okay. Read a book or watch a movie? Book or movie? Movie. Okay. Book, both. Watch a movie? Both. Okay, great. And our last question, early bird, night owl. Okay, night, both, both, night. Nice. Okay, night. Ooh, love the emoji. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for participating. I love the emoji. Okay, so you are here. This sign is both literal and like the bubble on a Google map and figurative, a philosophical statement. You are here is one of the underlying philosophies of design thinking, especially as it applies to life design, is that you start from where you are. The past is gone, the future unknown, and so the place to begin is simply where you are now. So by embracing this philosophy, it is possible to let go of self-judgment, stop procrastinating, and just get started. Okay, so before we get started, I'm going to introduce you to the design thinking. So design thinking is a structure process typically used by designers to develop products. And since we're designing our own lives, the acceptance stage has been added to the process, and that's the purple one. And we first accept where and who we are now and start from here. And the 5 stages of the design thinking process are empathize to understand your user's needs. So in life design, that will be us. You will be understanding your needs, your own needs. And then you're going to define your needs and problems and ideate, develop potential solutions and prototype. So prototype, you're going to try out things, transform your idea into tangible solution, and then test your solution. Okay, and these 5 mindsets are how designers think differently. So let's go through the mindsets. Okay, so we have the radical collaboration. So design is a collaborative process, and many of the best ideas are going to come from other people. So what's radical is that you want a diverse team with different experiences, perspectives, points of views, and even belief. And then moving on to reframing. So reframing is how designers get unstuck. So reframing enables designers to examine ways to look at problems differently. It's a way to gain new perspectives in order to increase the opportunity for innovation. And now curiosity. Curiosity makes everything new. It invites exploration. Curiosity is an open approach to learning more, and designers look through the lens of curiosity rather than judgment or rushing to find a solution. So you will often hear designers say, "Tell me more," or they'll ask open questions to get at needs and wants to find what works and what doesn't and what's missing. And then we have the mindfulness of process. So this one is a really important one. Being aware of the where you are in the design thinking process is important because it informs your approach. And it's also important to be aware of your own process. Are you rushing to a solution? Are you blocked? Are you energized by certain activities and drained by others? Being mindful of the process is key to the journey of the product and life design. And we have bias towards action. So this is the heart of design thinking because you're committed to building your way forward. Designers try things, they test out ideas, and they're not concerned about failing, but rather they keep trying things until they find what works and what solves the problem. And designers embrace change. They are not attached to one particular outcome. And lastly, we have storytelling. And this is added to the 5 mindsets. So storytelling is part of all 5 of these mindsets and processes. It's important to reflect, debrief, and share how you felt or what you discovered during the process. And over to you, Kim. Oh, is it me? Is it still me? It's not Kim yet. Okay. So making decisions, a process for choosing. So now we're going to share a decision-making process to help you make great decisions that you feel happy with. But before we do that, let's ground ourselves in a real decision. So if you have your piece of paper and pen ready, so please take a minute to reflect on the following questions. So I will I would like you to jot down a real decision you need to make or an important choice, maybe one where you feel stuck or indecisive. So jot down your real decision. What do you want to decide today? Okay, and next, jot down what emotions come up when you think about making this decision. Is it happy or anger, fear, frustration? And I'm going to give you about a minute or two to think about what decisions you want to make and what emotion is connected to that. Okay. So write it down on your piece of paper. Do you have any decision you need to make for work, or is it for your ohana related, work related? Is it halal related? Is it relationship with your coworker or boss, friends? Yeah, write down that decision you need to make, and we'll come back to it later during the activity. So keep that piece of paper, and then I'm going to explain a little bit more about the elements of decision. So when it comes to decision, every decisions have three elements. So the first one is options. On the left, you see options, the things you're choosing between the options. And we have the objectives, the goals or criteria you have for the decision and what you want out of the decision. And then lastly, we have the information. So what you know about your options and objectives and how those elements line up, or what you may still not know. So these are the three elements of a decision. But what do we do with these elements? So it's helpful to have a process to work here. Okay, so now here's how we think about decision making. There are 4 steps. First, we gather and create lots of options. And then if we're good at generating lots of options, then we'll need to narrow those down. Eventually, we choose. And finally, many of us have a tendency to agonize over the decisions we've made. So sometimes we even agonize over weeks or months or even years. And we'll encourage you not to agonize, but rather to let go and move on, to see if you might reframe it. The decision is really made not after choosing, but after accepting the decision and letting go of all other options. So what we want is to let go and move on. And we'll share some research for why this is helpful strategy. And let's take a look at these in order. Okay, the first step is gather and create options, which for many of us can be easy to do. This is the piece of the process that really helps with the letting go and moving on process. And for me, it's much easier to let go and move on when I know that no matter what happens with the choice I make, I can always gather and create new valuable options. Okay, so even though there are all of these options, many of us find ourselves choosing between 2 things. So should I do this or not do this? Or should I do this or that? So I want to flag that sort of thought process as an opportunity to think beyond the binary, because research suggests that expanding our options beyond 2 is helpful in making good decisions and decisions we're likely to be happy with. So this is a short video highlighting some work done by Chip and Dan Heath, who wrote a book on decision making called Decisive. Okay, let's go.
You and I will have to make many hard decisions over our lifetime. Like, what career should I pursue? What school should I go to? And which job offer should I take? But here's a troubling fact. When faced with hard decisions like these, we will make a decision we regret more often than we think. When people make the decision to go to law school, pass the bar, and become a lawyer, there's a 44% chance that they will not recommend a young person to become a lawyer, according to the American Bar Association. When a Philadelphia school system examined the retention rate of their teachers, they found that the teachers were twice as likely to drop out of the school system than the students were. To avoid making a decision that we'll later regret, like these lawyers and teachers, we need to identify common decision pitfalls and avoid them. In the book Decisive, authors Chip and Dan Heath identify these 3 dangerous decision pitfalls. Pitfall number 1, we rarely consider more than 2 options when making a decision. In 1993, Ohio State University researcher Paul Nutt examined 168 decisions of big organizations. He found that 69% of their decisions only had one alternative. These 2-option decisions led to unfavorable results more than half the time. But when the executives consider more than 2 options, They had a favorable result more than 2/3 of the time.
So just by adding a third option, moving away from the binary, suddenly the quality of outcome goes up. So always have at least 3 or more options. Okay, so the takeaway is the next time you find yourself choosing between just 2 things, see if you can add or expand your set of options to 3 or more. You'll gain perspective. You'll see more possibility. You'll likely decrease anxiety about the notion of a right choice and instead make a perfectly good decision in the end. So now that you know that you have added more possibilities to your decision, it's time to start narrowing down your options to a more manageable number. So you increase your possibilities to make sure you're not missing anything or leaving any option out. And then from all of these options, you'll start to narrow your decision down. So I'm not sure about you guys, but sometimes I get overwhelmed when I have too many options to choose from and experience what is called choice overload. And there's evidence that suggests that having too many options is actually worse. And let's take a look at this video. So this is a research from the JAM study conducted by Dr. Sheena Iyengar and what it has to say about choice overload.
So when I was a graduate student at Stanford University, I used to go to this very, very upscale grocery store. At least at that time, it was truly upscale. It was a store called Draeger's. Now this store, it was almost like going to an amusement park. They had 250 different kinds of mustards and vinegars and over 500 different kinds of fruits and vegetables and more than 24 different kinds of bottled water. And this is during a time when we actually used to drink tap water. I used to love going to this store. But on one occasion, I asked myself, well, how come you never buy anything? Oh, here's their olive oil aisle. They had over 75 different kinds of olive oils, including those that were in a locked case that came from 1,000-year-old olive trees. So I one day decided to pay a visit to the manager, and I asked the manager, you know, is this model of offering people all this choice really working? And he pointed to the busloads of tourists that would show up every day, with cameras ready usually. We decided to do a little experiment. And we picked jam for our experiment. Here's their jam aisle. They had 348 different kinds of jam. We set up a little tasting booth right near the entrance of the store. We either put out 6 different flavors of jam or 24 different flavors of jam. And we looked at 2 things. First, in which case were people more likely to, stop, sample some jam? More people stopped when there were 24, about 60%, than when there were 6, about 40%. The next thing we looked at is in which case were people more likely to buy a jar of jam. And now we see the opposite effect. Of the people who stopped when they were 24, only 3% of them actually bought a jar of jam. Of the people who stopped when they were 6, well, now we saw that 30% of them actually bought a jar of jam. Now, if you do the math, people were at least 6 times more likely to buy a jar of jam if they encountered 6 than if they encountered 24. Now, choosing not to buy a jar of jam is actually probably good for us. At least it's good for our waistlines. But it turns out that this choice overload problem affects us even in very consequential decisions. We choose not to choose even when it goes against our best self-interests.
Yeah, so Dr. Iyengar says something really interesting. We choose not to choose even when it goes against our best interest. So at some point, narrowing down is so important because it will make the decision manageable and keep us from getting stuck. So how do we narrow down? Next, Angela is going to walk you through how to exactly do that. Okay, off to you, Angela.
Thank you so much, Tomoko. So we're going to talk about simplifying a decision. And when we need to simplify a decision, many of us turn into a pros and cons list. So who here has ever made a pros and cons list? Anybody? Yes.
Yes.
Right? It kind of looks like this. And so you figure out what is good and what is not good. And then you decide to go with one that hopefully has the most pros and then the fewest cons. This is one perfectly serviceable tool. But what we want to do is introduce you to another powerful tool for narrowing down options called a decision matrix. This is a way to use visual thinking skills. So it allows you to tap into the parts of your brain that go beyond just language or words and to find new information about yourself. The tool also allows for pattern recognition, which is important for designers to get even more accurate information about how small the differences between the seemingly agonizing choices may actually be. A decision matrix makes use of the components of a decision that we considered before. So as Tomoko shared with us, those three areas are the options, objectives, and the information. And this tool will help us simplify a decision by viewing them systematically. So on the top, you have your options, which are the choices that you're deciding between. And then on the side, you'll have your objectives. These are the criteria that you will use. These are the things you're trying to get at or learn, and the factors that you're going to use to make the decision. And the information that we have about each corresponding space within the grid. An example is going to help us bring this to life. So let's take a look at a career-related example. Some examples of the objectives I might have in a job include a minimum additional skill building, so I don't have to go through a lot of training, something that's interesting or rewarding, something that pays the bills, something that has the ideal location for me, and then, of course, the schedule. So, for example, let's consider fictional career paths: the Tooth Fairy, Santa Claus, the Boogie Monster, and the Cupid. So the Tooth Fairy visits children and leaves them money in exchange for baby teeth that have fallen out. Santa Claus brings gifts to children worldwide on Christmas. The Boogie Monster is a term we apply to things that scare children at night when they're alone. So this monster is often portrayed as living underneath their bed. And Cupid is a fictional character who makes people fall in love by shooting at them with his arrows. So it's important to not imagine that we can calculate a correct decision. And one way to keep that in mind is to use shaded circles or smiley faces as the way to indicate how well each option meets each objective. So let's walk through an example. Considering Santa Claus. In this case, I think that it would be really rewarding work. Santa gets to give gifts to children all over the world. So I'm going to give it a fully shaded circle. But the location on the North Pole really isn't for me. In the case of the Tooth Fairy, maybe I've done some research online and I know that this job has a really good salary. But as I'm researching, I realized that the Boogie Monster schedule is really bad. Like, I would have to wake up in the middle of every night to scare kids. But Cupid's schedule, on the other hand, is great. I would only need to work 1 day per year. So we can see that following this process for each option and objective. Before we get into examining what we learned here, a quick word. If you're doing a matrix and you realize you don't actually know how to fill out a particular square in your grid, it actually just means you're missing some information. So those blank spots can turn into the prototype, which is one of the areas that Tomoko talked about earlier. For example, maybe I'm still left wondering, how does the Tooth Fairy pay the bills? That's something I could find out by doing a prototype. So I can contact some tooth fairies and do informational interviews with them. What if I don't have time right now to find out because a decision deadline is looming? Well, this process can help me plan for the short term and then also for the long term. So maybe I'll be the Boogie Monster who lives under the bed at night. And while I'm at that job, I can meet the Tooth Fairy who also comes to visit at night. And while I'm in that job, I can set up an informational interview then. So how might this decision help give you insight into objectives that cannot be met now? So now we're going to simplify the decision with the information. The first thing that I notice is that each of these roles requires a similar amount of additional training. So training is not going to be the factor that makes a difference between any of them. The next thing I can do is compare two options against each other. So as I look at the Boogie Monster versus the Tooth Fairy, I see the Tooth Fairy is at least as good, if not better, than the Boogie Monster on each of my objectives. So I can remove the Boogie Monster from my set of options. Bye, Boogie Monster. Okay, next, let's compare Cupid and Santa Claus. In this case, I see that Cupid is at least as good, if not better, than Santa Claus on every objective. So now we're left with a much simpler decision. As I compare these two, I again see that there is one factor on which they're equivalent. The question then is, which of these for me is the best option? So I'm leaning towards Cupid, even though the pay is probably less than the Tooth Fairy. But for me, the Cupid is more rewarding. Which one do you think is a better option of these? Go ahead and type in the chat. What is your suggestion and why? You're going to be my career counselor now. There's no wrong answer, by the way. So there was a new objective that came into play, the criteria of how cute do you look at work, which, you know what? I like that. Folks say Cupid and the Tooth Fairy. Anyone else have any thoughts? Tooth Fairy pays the bills. Scheduling is not that bad. Okay, night hours. Nice. Okay. So in a case like this, you could see there's not really a best option. Either option could be really great. So how do we decide? So let's see here. As we talked about, the decision matrix makes use of the components of a decision that we considered before, options, objectives, and information, right? And it helps us simplify a decision by viewing them systematically. So we can list our options along the top of the grid and our objectives along the side, and the information we have about each corresponding space within the grid. Okay, so we already had done this. But now let's continue. As we're looking at what decision we want to make, you want to be aware of the not. So not an option is actually not an option. It's just the absence of a choice. So sometimes we, again, the binary, right? So focus instead on what you might do instead, and then use these as options in your matrix. For example, I'm going to accept the offer, or I'm going to negotiate to change the terms, or I'm going to conduct more informational interviews. So it's not an either or, right? The options that you generate come out of your objectives, which is the thing you're trying to do or attain. Okay, so now it is your turn. You're going to have your pen and your paper ready, and you're going to draw this decision matrix just like this, a rough sketch. So you'll draw this grid. On the top right is your options, and then you're going to aim for at least 3, right? And then on the left side, you're going to have your criteria. You can choose to use the shaded circles, like in our example, or smiley or unsmiley faces to indicate how well each option meets your objective. So I'm going to give you, how much time, Tomoko, should we give them?
Maybe 5 minutes?
Okay, let's do 5 minutes, y'all. Go ahead in your own space and make this decision matrix grid for yourself. Okay, start wrapping up. Okie dokie. Timer has run. Alrighty. So hopefully you folks have managed to fill out most of the decision matrix. And so I'm curious to hear what it was like. So what was it like using the decision matrix as a tool to narrow down options? I'd love for a volunteer to share, maybe in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and share. So one participant shared that it opened their eyes and how it might look in the future. Excellent. Anyone else have some comments? Okay, another participant says that it helped them to realize that they need to do a little more research to get more information, which is one of the three legs, right, of the stool. Excellent. So my second question is, have you used other tools or resources that you found helpful to narrow down these options? For example, my personal share is I have sisters and I typically also talk with them. So that might be part of the research and the information. But I do ask for their guidance on some of my decisions to narrow down options. Anyone else have some thoughts?
I have the same because I have an older sister. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. So I have an older sister, so she's like a second mom to me. So every little to the biggest decision I make, yeah, I always confide in her, and then I'm like, "What do you think?" She's like, "Oh, I think this and that," but it's up to you. What do you think? But then I noticed that I do exactly what she tells me, like her opinion of what I'm trying to decide on. So yeah.
Yes. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. That's great. So, relying on another person, a trusted resource, is another way to help narrow down your options. And in some cases, they're so great that their advice really fits you. and you'd use it, the whole thing. And we're going to talk more about that actually, um, by using a process we call discernment. Okay, so this is like how you know things. It's embodied ways of knowing. And I'm going to introduce the word knowing. Okay. Um, how do we use knowing to help us make decisions? We call it discernment, or our embodied ways of knowing something. So there's different ways of knowing that we can use to identify and narrow down the elements of a decision, or even to make a decision itself. To dig into this and into the question of how we know what we know, we're going to do a quick and fun exercise. So I'm going to put a statement, actually, Chamoka will put the statement up on the screen. And then I would like you to put in the chat box as quickly as possible, true or false. So there will be a statement, and then you are going to write in the chat box, true or false. So let's go ahead and get that started. Sort of similar to what we did earlier. So the first one is, it's healthy to get 7 to 9 hours of sleep. True or false? Okay. So we got a lot of truths here. Okay, great. Um, so could someone share, and you can just share it in the chat if you want, why did you decide true? Okay, science, perhaps it's science. And overall health. So like, and school. Yep. So we've heard it in school. We can feel it in our bodies. We can feel it like if we get that much sleep, it helps with our mental health and our physical health. Great. So we have, research, right? Science, and then just your felt experience, right? Okay, let's try another one. A pound of feathers weighs more than a pound of bricks. True or false? Got a few falses. Is it a trick question? False, false, false. Okay, would anyone like to share why they selected what they did?
Because they're both a pound.
All right, so that's cognitive. Same weight, different density. Nice. Okay, so cognitive, right? It's a pound. That's something that we can think of. All right, let's do another one. Everything happens for a reason, true or false? We have some undecideds. False, true, true, true. Quite a few trues, false. All right. Why did you select what you did?
I selected true because going off a religious view, because I'm Catholic,
Okay.
and you know how we always say God works in mysterious ways. So every time like something happens, or I was like, okay, God intended this for me, for this to happen to me because it's a teaching moment, or it's gonna benefit me, or something like that.
Great. That's a very good example. So this is a spiritual one, right? For you, according to your faith, this is the way that we see the world. And others think, it's more intuitive, like some things just happen. There's no explanation or reason, right? It's not good or bad. And then some folks think, this could be scientific, the butterfly effect, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Or maybe you decided it or something causes it. So that also can be maybe a spiritual manifestation of something that you wanted to happen or that happened. It could also just be an emotional decision, right? I'm just grateful for all the things that happened in my life because they led me here. So as you can see from this example, there's a number of ways to have that embodied knowledge. Let's try one more. it's wrong to kill ants. True or false? Okay, so we have a couple falses. We have a sometimes and depends, and a false. Wow. Okay, so and we have the reasons why. So, this is great. So I love this, you guys. So false. So someone says they bite me, they die. All right. LOL. And then another one, I don't know if it's true or false, but that they, impeded in your very personal space. So they made a nest in your laptop. That is frightening. Someone says it's terrifying. And then another reason that it's not true is because they don't have brains. So again, you're thinking about this like, is this scientific, ecological, they don't have brains, or maybe it's an emotional, like they bit me, they're in my nesting in my laptop, um, or it could be a spiritual decision, right? Like I as a human being don't kill other things, living things. So this again is just another example of the different ways of knowing, and there's no right or wrong for the way that you decided. So let's move on to talking about discernment. And Kim is actually going to lead that part of this session. Thank you.
Okay. So we all just use discernment in making those true and false decisions. And we define discernment as a decision making that integrates multiple ways of knowing through cognitive, affective, physical, and even spiritual, as opposed to just deciding. So how do you know when you know? When you make a decision, do you trust your gut? Or if you're going to go with your gut, how do you listen to your gut? And what words does your gut speak to you? And how do you add these gut feelings to the facts that you might already have? If you can understand your own ways of knowing, like what your gut is telling you, the argument is that your discernment will be more effective, that you will make better and more authentic decisions for yourself by being able to employ these different elements. And by the way, lots of this takes a lot of time, both to implement and to master. But using these multiple ways of knowing and listening to yourself is important in the decision-making process. So let's elaborate on the multiple ways of knowing to notice and recognize or distinguish between things. So discernment integrates the cognitive ways of knowing or making decisions, such as the pros and cons list we talked about, the decision matrix that Angela walked you through, or those true and false questions we all just answered. We can use emotional intelligence, and this is using your own feelings, your intuition, or spirituality. And we can pay attention to our bodies, how we might react physically to different possibilities. And this is, again, just, trusting your gut. We can also draw on the wisdom of mentors, family, and even our community. All of these have ways of knowing that are important when making different types of decisions. So again, how do you know when you know? As there are different ways of knowing, I can describe the experience of knowing in a variety of different ways. I can have experience of knowing when I recognize something, as opposed to just thinking about it. A good example of this is one of the authors, Dave Evans. His wife previously said in an interview that I didn't fall in love with him, I just recognized him, when she was referring to falling in love with her husband. And then there's the internal effect of knowing. So for example, I could have been in a meeting and I wasn't sure if I wanted to be part of the project they were asking me to be part of. But I couldn't stop thinking about it on the way home. So I kind of, I knew that I wanted to participate, but, due to some other reservations that I had and mostly procrastination, it took me another few weeks for my brain to kind of catch up and provide like a detailed, rational justification that will, officially allow me to make that decision. But in truth, I kind of already made that decision to do it when I was in the car and on that way home. So as you learn to kind of trust your initial experience and knowing well enough to recognize it, I'll help you trust it and yourself a little bit sooner. And it can be a powerful decision tool. There's also body signs. So when you feel it in your body, a counselor friend of Dave Evans knows she's getting to the heart of the matter with her client when her right knee starts to ache. Why her right knee? I don't know. But her unconscious has decided that her right knee is the place. So when her right knee aches, she thinks, oh, this is something important. It's time for me to really pay attention because she's so aware of her body. And then there's collective confirmation. This is the insight that occurs when everybody around the table suddenly realizes as a group what the best decision is, or what direction to go into. And it's not because everybody voted on it. It just everybody kind of comes up with it, like, oh, we should go in this direction, or they just, we decide this. And that brings us to how do we say this wrong? Simultaneity. When you're thinking simultaneity. Thank you, Angela. I have this. This is when you're thinking about something and trying to make a decision, and this is when everything you're trying to think about and you see it come up everywhere. So, for example, if I'm thinking about going to Japan or Korea for a vacation, and then I start to see Japan everywhere. So, it's Japanese week in the cafe at the college, or I run into an old coworker and she just returned from Japan. Or I go to my design class and I see beautiful pictures of cherry blossoms everywhere. So many of us might have had this experience where you see it everywhere. And you can determine, might think that the universe has determined it for us, that I need to go to Japan. Or you can question if this is the deep internal consciousness really attracted to Japan over Korea, and is taking every opportunity to respond to something around you and signal to you what it thinks through, such as like a gut feeling. So I'm going to say it again, simultaneity is when it feels like the universe is trying to get your attention and point you in that one direction. And then lastly, we have that aha moment. And that's when it's like, it just like poof, like a light bulb. You're like, that's it. And you have that decision. It's really cool when that happens. It doesn't always happen often. And sometimes it's kind of difficult to orchestrate, but it's still definitely worth taking a look at. So many of you already have some insight on how these and other ways of knowing work. And we want you to start paying more attention to how you pay attention and how you pay attention to how you know. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So how might you, or perhaps how do you already develop your personal ways of knowing? So you could do this maybe through journaling or reflection, meditation. Sometimes music can help clear your mind, put you in a different mindset. Yoga, or maybe like take a really long, uninterrupted walk sometimes will help. There's also gratefulness exercises. Okay. So does everybody remember the Cookie Monster slide? It was really brief. And Tomoko was asking you to jot down a question and an emotion that went along with it. So we're going to go back to that question. I want you guys to think how you might apply multiple ways of knowing and discernment to that decision. So for instance, could you talk to a friend that might offer different suggestions? Or maybe you do journaling that might help you think of additional ideas that you didn't think of before. Or you could try meditation to help clear your mind. And this could help you see your problem in a different light. So we'll give you about 30 seconds to a minute here just to kind of jot down your thoughts. So we can come back to that a little bit at the end too. And we're going to move on and kind of talk about or explore the role that emotions have on us when we're choosing. So if you guys want to reflect on the time that you've experienced that gut feeling, remember what we were just talking about, and do you listen to that gut feeling? And if you did listen to it, how did it go? Dan Goleman, he's a psychologist and a science journalist, wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence in 2006. And he popularized the idea that a good decision making included using emotions and some understanding of your own gut feelings. Now, Dan suggests that your primitive brain, which is located in your emotional center, acts as the keeper of your wisdom database. And this determines what's a good decision or what's a bad decision, kind of what you should go towards or maybe turn away from. And this is all through gut feelings and emotions and not through words. It's your gut experience and your feelings that inform your brain what's a good idea or a bad idea. And the point here is that you start to pay attention to these signals from your primitive brain and emotions. And this can be used as a valuable data in your decision-making process. But one caution, since this is the sum total of our life experience, it can also be the source of a bias, as it may reflect lessons learned from our social environment. Okay, so we're going to continue to talk about choosing, and we're going to hear from Ruth Chang, who's like a philosophy professor at Rutgers, on what to do when the decisions we have narrowed down seem equal or on par, and then thus we're stuck because we don't know which option to choose.
So when we face hard choices, we shouldn't beat our head against a wall trying to figure out which alternative is better. There is no best alternative. Instead of looking for reasons out there, we should be looking for reasons in here. Who am I to be? You might decide to be a pink sock wearing, cereal loving, country living banker. And I might decide to be a black sock wearing, urban donut loving artist. What we do in hard choices is very much up to each of us. Now, people who don't exercise their normative powers in hard choices are drifters. We all know people like that. I drifted into being a lawyer. I didn't put my agency behind lawyering. I wasn't for lawyering. Drifters allow the world to write the story of their lives. They let mechanisms of reward and punishment, pats on the head, fear, the easiness of an option, to determine what they do. So the lesson of hard choices, reflect on what you can put your agency behind, on what you can be for, and through hard choices, become that person. Far from being sources of agony and dread, hard choices are precious opportunities for us to celebrate what is special about the human condition. That the reasons that govern our choices as correct or incorrect sometimes run out. And it is here in the space of hard choices that we have the power to create reasons for ourselves to become the distinctive people that we are. And that's why hard choices are not a curse, but a godsend.
Okay. So when we're faced with difficult choices, you can ask yourself, who am I to become on the other side of this decision? And hopefully, using these various tools and capabilities, we can have confidence in making a choice. But once we made a decision, it's important to let go of all the other options we've been considering and move on. Now, to consider why letting go and moving on is so important, we're going to hear from one more psychologist, Dan Gilbert. And he's a psychologist or professor at Harvard. And he's going to walk us through a group of students that he had that were given the option of reversing their decision on a print.
Advantage. Here's an experiment we did at Harvard. We created a photography course, a black and white photography course, and we allowed students to come in and learn how to use a darkroom. So we gave them cameras, they went around campus, they took 12 pictures of their favorite professors in their dorm room and their dog and all the other things they wanted to have Harvard memories of. They bring us the camera, we make up a contact sheet, they figure out which are the 2 best pictures, and we now spend 6 hours teaching them about darkrooms, and they blow 2 of them up, and they have 2 gorgeous 8x10 glossies of meaningful things to them, and we say, which one would you like to give up? They say, I have to give one up? Oh yes, we need one as evidence of the class project. So you have to give me one, you have to make a choice, you get to keep one, and I get to keep one. Now, there are 2 conditions in this experiment. In one case, the students are told, but you know, if you want to change your mind, I'll always have the other one here, and in the next 4 days before I actually mail it to headquarters, I'll be glad to, headquarters, I'll be glad to swap it out with you. In fact, I'll come to your dorm room and just give me an email. Better yet, I'll check with you. You ever want to change your mind? It's totally returnable. The other half of the students are told exactly the opposite. Make your choice, and by the way, the mail is going out, gosh, in 2 minutes to England. Your picture will be winging its way over the Atlantic. You will never see it again. Now, half of the students in each of these conditions are asked to make predictions about how much they're going to come to like the picture that they keep and the picture they leave behind. Other students are just sent back to their little dorm rooms, and they are measured over the next 3 to 6 days on their liking and satisfaction with the pictures. And look at what we find. First of all, here's what students think is going to happen. They think they're going to maybe come to like the picture they chose a little more than the one they left behind, but these are not statistically significant differences. It's a very small increase, and it doesn't much matter whether they were in the reversible or irreversible condition. Wrong-o. Bad simulators. Because here's what's really happening, both right before the swap and 5 days later. People who are stuck with that picture, who have no choice, who can never change their mind, like it a lot. And people who are deliberating, should I return it? Have I gotten the right one? Maybe this isn't the good one. Maybe I left the good one, have killed themselves. They don't like their picture. And in fact, even after the opportunity to swap has expired, they still don't like their picture. Why? Because the irreversible condition is not conducive to the synthesis of happiness. So here's the final piece of this experiment. We bring in a whole new group of naive Harvard students, and we say, you know, we're doing a photography course, and we can do it one of 2 ways. We could do it so that when you take the 2 pictures, you'd have 4 days to change your mind, or we're doing another course where you take the 2 pictures and you make up your mind right away and you can never change it. Which course would you like to be in? Duh! 66% of the students, 2/3, prefer to be in the course where they have the opportunity to change their mind. Hello? 66% of the students choose to be in the course in which they will ultimately be deeply dissatisfied with the picture. Because they do not know the conditions under which synthetic happiness grows.
Okay, really quick, because I know we're on time. Just want to say, just as Dan beautifully stated, once you make a decision, the critical thing is to not be reevaluating. And all of us have choices, but once you commit to something, you have to commit long enough to truly get the value out of it. And that is why you should let go and move on. The point of an option is for it to eventually become a decision. An option never followed through and never realized or never chosen is just an idea. It's really not actually anything at all. And it turns out it doesn't work. The most effective thing to be successful and happy is once you made a choice, act like you have no other option but to be fully engaged with the choice that you made. Now, this is all about full speed ahead on the choice that you made. Even if you wanted to change path in the future, you still have to try that choice out. Okay, so what makes a good decision? As we close this discussion on decision making, I want to offer one final thought. Really quick, if I decide to go to the beach this weekend and there's a 15% chance of rain, I check the weather, check my weather app, and only 15% chance of rain, so I decide to go. But when I get there, it ends up pouring rain. Did I make a bad decision? Many of us intuitively think that the quality of a decision is equal to the quality of the outcome. But there's also factors that we cannot control. And what I want to suggest is that these two things are not always synonymous. If I considered all the data, followed a process like the one we shared with you today, and made a well-informed decision, the best that I could, then I would argue that I made a good decision, regardless of how that outcome looked. So with this in mind, we can recognize it as most valuable to consider what matters most to us, what we can control, and where these two overlap. And we want to put our focus there. Okay, so again, I'm sorry, we're a few minutes over. So we're going to skip the reflection, but hopefully if you guys have any questions, you can stay on. We'd be happy to answer any of them. And thank you guys so much for attending and for your time.
And thank you everybody for coming. Before you leave, please fill out this very short survey. It's going to help us continue on our work. And we will be emailing you guys with a recording. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.